Alright, so in today's video we're going to be talking about probably one of my favourite builds in New World, and that is the Musket Rapier. Specifically the Bleed Musket Rapier using the Finisher Artifact. Now, we're going to do this in a structured way where I start off right from the get-go of leveling all the way to the end when you're getting your best in slot gear. And we're also going to showcase some gameplay, we'll probably have put in that at the start, so you can get a brief overview of what the build is like. So, to start off with, we'll cover early game leveling. Now, early game leveling, the one thing that I recommend is doing a 3-2-1 when you're committing points to leveling. So what I mean by this is when you're leveling, for every 5 points you get, put 3 in dex. I think I miscounted there. Put 3 in dex, 2 in int, and 1 in con. The thing with musket is, in-game especially, you're going to be a very squishy build but deal a lot of damage. This is the biggest strength and also the biggest weakness of the musket in itself. Musket is one of those builds that requires having very good gear to out DPS and have good DPS, but also is very squishy at the same time, being able to deal such high numbers basically. So basically in in-game, these are the sort of stats you're going to be looking out for. We'll cover this more specifically later when you get to min-max attribute trees, but for now, as soon as you get to endgame, you should hopefully be able to hit a 350-150, and then the rest you would put into constitution again. Following that leveling experience, always doing 3 points dex, 2 points ints to 1 part con is what I would recommend. As a dex player, as a musket especially, again, you're going to be a very squishy build. Now we're going to quickly jump onto basic combos and trees at the same time. So I'm going to have a few different options for trees that I'm going to quickly put on screen and talk about. So the first tree is one of my favorite trees. This is the Duelist tree, which handles the best up in close range combat, and when, again, dueling other players in 1v1s especially. It is my preferred build for most encounters. Now, the second tree here is one I've actually been having a lot of fun with recently, and this is the Sticky Bomb tree, and more specifically the tree that I've also been using in War, as the Sticky Bomb can be very beneficial in your clumps when you need to help a team. The third and last tree that I've also been messing around with, and I do find fun as well, is the Shooter's Stance tree, which is probably the preferred PvE tree, especially for the new Hive of Gorgons raid, which we'll also talk about later. So, covering those two trees, we sort of have a basis on the abilities now. So, again, as you can see from all three trees, 2 of the abilities that we've picked up every single time that are essential to musket builds are both Powder Burn and Power Shot. These 2 abilities are very essential and are one of the reasons why you deal so much damage. So, effectively, Powder Burn, we'll hover over here, is going to overload our musket with gunpowder and will deal a burn damage over time effect on that target we hit. The best part about Powder Burn is not only that burn we deal, after that, sequential hits are going to deal 8% increased damage to that burning target. So we effectively get a buff on our musket shots on that target we hit with our prior shot, which was the Powder Burn. This lasts a total of, I think, 7 seconds and can be extended by another 4 seconds with chronic trauma. So that is hitting a headshot. That burn now lasts 11 seconds total. You can make this burn last even longer by putting burning on the ring, which is a perk that extends the duration, and we'll talk about that later as well. Jumping onto the next tree, or next perk here, is Power Shot. Power Shot is effectively an extra juiced up musket shot. Effectively, it overloads our musket once again, and we deal 160% weapon damage and an additional 30% to PvE. So this is a very strong PvE ability and also a very strong PvP ability as well at the same time. Second to that, we have, of course, got Shooter Stance. This is effectively a ability that's going to put us in a crouching position, and we will be able to quickly fire 3 shots. This is a very good ability for burst and is also, again, very strong in PvE. This does have its cons in PvP, making you a static target and very easy to hit. The next node on Shooter Stance, more specifically, allows us to get 5 shots in our burst, which is, again, more powerful for PvE than anything. Again, it does make you more of a target in PvP, and is usually why it's not commonly used. However, it can have its situations playing it right. Jumping onto the Trapper tree on the right side of things, we've got Stopping Power, and it's again one of my preferred last abilities I use in my Duelist tree that I would have showed you at the start. Stopping Power is effectively going to apply a stagger when we hit an enemy with it, which can be very useful as a utility ability, and is one of the 2 only utility abilities on the musket entirely that is actually very, very useful. Next to that, we have traps. Now, I don't show traps in any of my builds, as personally, I find traps are very clunky and very predictable to a good player. So, most of the time, traps will only actually work against a player that doesn't know what's going on. Up in the higher end of PvP, traps are very predictable, slow, and clunky, and especially if the opponent has a cleanse pot or any kind of CC break, such as Berserk on Hatchet, which is very commonly used, they will effectively be able to get out of the jail, or sorry, get out of the trap with a get out of jail free card. So that is why I don't recommend traps. Now, there are builds that you can do with traps, and they can be fun to use, but again, I highly recommend against them in in-game PvP, as they are very predictable. But try it out, see if you like it for yourself. I'm not saying you can't, I'm just saying that I wouldn't recommend it. Last but not least is Sticky Bomb. This is an ability that's had its ups and downs. Prior, maybe a couple of years ago now, it was a very strong and sought after ability, especially in war, because of its clump ability. Recently, they changed the distance you can throw Sticky Bomb to be much shorter, making it more or less obsolete. However, recently it has received effectively a 20% damage increase, making it slightly more viable again, especially why I've been loving running it in wars, especially for clumps. So again, covering these 6 abilities here and showing you my 3 previous trees. One for the shooter stance, one for the stopping power, and one for the sticky. Now, jumping back onto the reason of why do I always run Powder Burn and Power Shot in my builds. That is because, in conjunction with the right passive over here, Tactical Reload, we get to reload a musket bullet when we dodge. This is only once every 6 seconds. However, the best part about this is that we can do a tactical reload from our Powder Burn into a Power Shot and deal a significant amount of damage. It's probably one of my favorite combos and one of the most commonly used combos for the musket out there. So, for example, I'm going to simply shoot and reload Powder Burn and then roll and shoot my Power Shot, just like that. That's how quick that combo was. Last but not least, we have the Stopping Power tree, which can be even more fun. So, I'll quickly respec here once our abilities go back on cooldown and show you what the triple shot combo looks like. The triple shot combo is fantastic for the stopping power, as I previously pointed out, because the stopping power doesn't need a reload. And what I mean by this is you can use this ability with effectively no reload time, no downtime. So again, I'm going to chuck these abilities on here. I'm going to go like this and put them in the correct order I use them in. So I'm going to simply reload Power Shot, shoot, tack reload into Power Shot, and then stopping power. And we shoot 3 shots in that quick span of less than maybe 1.5 seconds roughly, and allows us to pull off a very nasty up close combo, which is fantastic for dueling especially. So now that we've covered the trees, the next most important part we probably want to cover is our equip load. So more specifically on musket, you should always run the light equip load, as there are benefits to doing so. So hovering over the icon over here, you get a base damage increase in light, you get outgoing healing plus 30%, that's not relevant to us. You do get a couple minuses though, obviously being a squishier class and getting to deal more DPS, there are its downsides too. One of those being less block stability, but you're not really blocking anyways as a musket, so you shouldn't be worrying about that. Stamina dodge cost is 50, that's pretty much universal now. Then for 1 second after taking a melee hit, dodge distance is reduced by 20% and you cannot run. This was a significant nerf they did maybe half a year ago now, or maybe more than that, might even be a year ago now, when the Elysian Wilds released, and actually makes a pretty big difference, especially in the current meta where you're getting chased by a lot of SNS and hatchets and maybe even spears. This can actually take a very big toll on your performance, and is why positioning and keeping distance is more important than ever before in the current meta. So that is just something I quickly want to point out, and last but not least, you take more crit damage as a light. So there is effectively, used to be a perk called Resilient way back in the game's launch. If you're coming or returning from launch way back in 2021, you might have been familiar with the perk Resilient. This is now no longer in the game, and we'll be talking about armor perks a little bit here, but to start off with, this is now built natively into the equip loads as a bonus, and it's not like as much as it used to be. Obviously, back in the day, you could run 5 Resilient, and you would effectively have always 25% crit damage mitigation, but they've now built it into each equip load as a base level crit mitigation, So 15% at light, 20% at medium, and 25% at heavy. Now, again, the reason why we run the light is mainly for that base damage increase. As you can see, there's no base damage increase on medium, and we actually lose base damage in heavy, making both medium and heavy obsolete for the musket class. Last but not least, in light equip load, you also get the light roll, which is most important for musket as well. So, now that we've covered the reason why we run our equip load, our trees, our starting off attribute splits, we can now jump onto the artifacts. Now, in in-game, if you're already in in-game, you might be familiar with this, and if you've played the game before, there's something called artifacts, which is the highest tier of item in the game, and you can only have one of each gear type equipped with an artifact. So, you only have one armor artifact equipped, one jewellery artifact equipped, and one weapon artifact equipped. Artifacts have unique perks to them that can only be found on that item that allow you to create super unique builds, and we're going to be covering one very specific artifact throughout this entire build guide known as the Finisher. This is one of the best and most important weapons for this build, as it really brings it together and allows us to have some really cool effects. So to start off with, the Finisher is effectively an artifact rapier that gives us an extra 15% damage against bleeding targets. So what we can do, and not only that, is this benefit, or this Finisher's Harmony exclusive perk on the artifact, allows us to get that benefit on our offhand weapon. So if we hit a bleeding target with our musket, we get to deal bonus damage with our musket on that bleeding target because we have the Finisher equipped on our offhand, which is a really, really cool perk to have. So stacking that again with that musket, this is the best in slot musket. We'll talk about best in slot gear later, because I do want to start with pre-BiS and what you would run before you get the ultimate in-game gear, is that I highly recommend that you try the Finisher and see how you feel about it. It is one of the best weapons in the game, not only for PvE DPS, it is also one of the most commonly used musket and bow offhand weapons in a PvP as well. So this is, again, one of my favorite builds, and is what I've been running for about a year now, actually, yeah. Elysian Wilds released in October last year. It doesn't feel like that long ago. So, now that we've covered the weapon artifact, the Finisher, where do you get the Finisher? So, artifacts specifically have a bunch of different ways to be obtained, and more specifically, the Finisher artifact, this rapier, comes from the Elysian Wilds Isle of Zurvan Elite Stronghold. Now, I recommend having at least a group, maybe even a 10-man, to farm this drop, as it is an elite mob that is very tanky, and is probably not the easiest thing to solo, unless you have a super kitted out heavy build with a lot of leeching. So, I would highly recommend getting a 5-man or a 10-man, heading to the Isle of Zurvan. You can actually swim across now, which is a nice feature. And then farming the mammoth. I will have an image of it on the screen here that I'll put up. It is effectively a big mammoth that you will kill, and it has a 20% chance to drop the Finisher itself. And after 5 kills, you are guaranteed the Finisher. There is a pity system in the game now for every artifact drop except PvP track artifacts. So, effectively, you're going to go to Isle of Zurvan, you're going to kill this mammoth, and at least over 5 times you'll be guaranteed the Finisher artifacts. And that's that. Then you'll have a quest you'll be able to complete that will unlock the perks on it. So, I don't think I have any active, but effectively, you'll have to complete miniature quests to effectively unlock the perks here. And last but not least, you'll be able to add one of your own perks to it, which is a really cool system they also did maybe a year and a half ago now, where you can actually upgrade named items and artifacts, especially as they are technically named items. Well, the way we upgrade artifacts and named items, I will discuss a little bit later when we jump into pre-raid gear. But for now, we'll just cover the fact that you need to unlock the perks, and we'll jump over a bit more of the pre-raid stuff before we get into the best in slot discussion. So, to that, what is the best armor artifact we'll run? That is the Attuned Leather Pants. The Attuned Leather Pants are actually one of the easiest artifacts to get, which is very nice. These come from completing the Elysian Wilds MSQ chain. So, to get to the Elysian Wilds, you have to complete the 1 to 60 quest chain, and then the Brimstone quest chain, and then all of the Elysian Wilds quest chain. So it's a bit of a long one, but it is rewarding, and it is pretty fast to do if you have a mount nowadays. Unlike a couple of years ago when we did Brimstone without mounts. I will not discuss that because that was a fucking pain. But anyways, with that said, Attuned Leather Pants is the final reward of the campaign in the entire game. So you'll get these guaranteed, which is really nice. We do add shaking energy to these, and they are 725 again. We'll talk about upgrading later, but you'll get the attuned leather pants, you'll complete the quest to unlock the perks and such. So, what is the artifact jewelry we run for this build? I'm going to give you two options here. You have the Endless Thirst, which is what we also ran pre-New World Aeternum, which effectively gave us a 10% empower on popping a potion, and I think 10% fortify or 20% fortify. As well as a perk that made consumables 33% stronger, but gave them a 20% longer cooldown. I still love this artifact, and I do believe it still will be meta for the next artifact I'll discuss. So, the next artifact I'm talking about is the Elemental Band. This is a brand new artifact that AGS has just added to the game with New World Aeternum, which is only earned by completing the raid, and it drops from the last boss in particular, in the Hive of Gorgons. This is a 10-man 3-boss raid, and can be a little bit challenging, and some of you might be solo and not be able to get this. Do not worry though, as I'll talk about it later, but currently, I will say, this is going to be the meta deck string, because of a bug. So that is what I quickly want to get out of the way. This Elemental Band Ring is only going to be meta temporarily. And why I say this, and it is very annoying, and I hope AGS fixes this quick, so I don't have to put too much time into this side of things, and you can go back to the Endless Thirst, is that the Elemental Band says, or its exclusive perk says, it doesn't work off damages over time, so dots, or attunements, so this attunement is an attunement on my musket here, but it does. So there's effectively a big bug where the Elemental Band is giving more damage than it's supposed to. The damage it's giving is something called Empower. If you don't know what Empower is, it is effectively empowering your damage. Empower in New World is quite a common perk you'll see referenced a lot, and we'll be talking about a bit more later on when we talk about the armor perks and pre-raid gear. So all you need to know is that Empower is capped at 50%, and the Elemental Band allows us to get almost Empower capped from a ring alone. But we'll talk about that later. So, effectively, I guess we can probably jump into pre-raid gear now. So, once you've hit level 65, you've got your you've got your attuned leather pants, you've got your finisher. What comes next? I guess we can quickly cover Heartrunes. So, Heartrune is your ultimate. You unlock this by completing a secondary MSQ quest chain in the Brimstone Sands. You'll see the marker up towards the top right of the Brimstone Sands zone, and that is where you'll unlock your Heartrune slot. Your Heartrune is, again, it's effectively an ultimate that allows you to have a unique ability, such as this one here, which is the Brutal Heartrune of Cannon Blast, which is very popular among Dex players. This is the one I personally find the most fun, as it is a DPS ability, and allows you to have some very, very fun burst combos in combination with your musket, and again, is one I highly recommend checking out. Now, I'm going to have my full build guide website, I don't know if I mentioned this yet, in the description below. This showcases some of the best in slot builds in the game, and is quickly, my website references some of the best in slot builds in the game, and has hot links on every single item to the New World database. And that's another topic I'm quickly going to cover before we jump back into Heartrunes here. The New World database is one of the best resources in New World if you need to find something out, or find a location, or what a recipe requires. The New World database is effectively a host of everything in the game about when, where, and how to get it, and is a great resource to have by your side, pinned on your browser or on your phone. And my website with my build guides references everything onto the New World database, so you know exactly how to get it. Alright, now we're going to jump quickly back into artifacts here. Heartrunes we're talking about. Is not only is the Heartrune of Cannon Blast fantastic for DPS, you also have the Stoneform Heartrune, which is another one Dex players absolutely love, and is what I prefer using for Duelist builds and in War, as it is a much more competitive and safety Heartrune, especially as mentioned at the start of the video. Musket is a very, very squishy build, and having this Heartrune allows us to tank a lot of damage, especially in a tricky situation. Maybe you've got a hatchet or an SNS and a spear on your ass. This Heartrune is going to come in clutch many more times than one. So, the two Heartrunes I'm going to recommend is Stalwart Heartrune of Stoneform and Brutal Heartrune of Cannon Blast are the two Heartrunes I would switch between in in-game musket and bow PvP. Alright, now I believe, since we've covered Heartrunes, we can jump onto the pre-raid BiS gear. Now, pre-raid is a little bit all over the place in the current meta, as there's many different ways to go about it, and there's one significant way I want to talk about, which is the new PvP Island currency doubloons, Mystic Doubloons. Mystic Doubloons are going to allow you to get something called a 17 or a chance at 17 gear box. These are effectively, in my opinion, a very good way to get pre-raid gear up to 710 gear score. These boxes are also loot biased upon your highest stat and what you are wearing. So, before opening a doubloon box, which we'll jump into here quickly, you want to make sure you're in your light equipped load, you have dexterity as your highest stat, and even more so, you can take off your offhand jewelry. So for example, if I wanted to, I could take off my ring here, or sorry, my amulet and earring, and if I opened a trinket box, which I'll show you in a sec, I would get guaranteed a ring because it is loot biasing towards the only thing I have equipped. So that is something to keep in mind, and is kind of very annoying. I don't like the RNG around the whole pre-raid gear at the moment, but it is how the devs apparently want the game to be structured. So again, going over to the Well of Fortune here in Cutlass Keys, you'll see the icon here. You can open it up, and for 250 doubloons each, you have the doubloon exchange gear. I recommend getting a couple of boxes for each to get a chance at some decent 17 gear, up to 17 gear. It can be 690 to 710, it's in that range. And this will give you, again, some nice pre-raid gear that will give you a understanding, or at least some decent gear to work with until you get BiS. So I also quickly want to mention the easiest ways to get Mystic Doubloons. So currently, if you're familiar, the PvP Island is one of the sort of main focuses of getting Mystic Doubloons. Now, personally, I'm going to be honest, I think the free-for-all zone has a lot of problems, and if you've been there before, there's a lot of teaming, a lot of heavy builds that you can't kill, and in general, just people camping chests as well, which is very scummy, and is again one of the reasons why I don't actually go there myself, besides my weeklies for the Gold Coast Coconut, which I'll talk about later in the video. So, one of the, I guess, main ways that I get Mystic Doubloons is everything else in Cutlass Keys. So, if you didn't know, you can actually get Mystic Doubloons from all of the PvE content in Cutlass Keys as well. So, you can get Mystic Doubloons from these daily quests in Cutlass Keys, also from the Elite Zone. So, there's an Elite Zone in Cutlass Keys that has an absolute shitload of Elite chests that will give you a bunch of Mystic Doubloons on a daily basis. I believe the reset is 5 AM server time. So you'll simply get a group of players. You can go in recruitment chat and look for this here. So you can go here, and there'll be people constantly running Cutlass Elite chest runs where you will be able to get Mystic Doubloons daily. All in all, after completing the daily Cutlass quests, opening some chests around POIs here, and doing the Elite Zone, you should come out with 1,000 to 1,300 Mystic Doubloons every single day, just by doing PvE content without even having to touch the Gankfest free-for-all island, which is what I highly recommend doing. So, now that you've got some doubloons, you can go to the vendor and you can pick up some pre-raid gear from the purple boxes down here. So you can get a chest, a boots, a gloves, a helmet, legs, and then you can get a range box as well. Have your bow or musket out and it will guarantee that drop. Same with the rapier, so you could have your rapier only equipped and it will bias towards that weapon. You also have the trinkets here, and as I said, it'll loot bias towards the only trinket you have equipped. So you can do it one at a time, have your earring equipped, open it once, get an earring, take your earring off, put your ring on, open it, get a ring, take your ring off, put your amulet on, and get guaranteed an amulet. So, I also want to quickly talk about some of the dailies I highly recommend buying in the doubloon vendor. And this is the Gold Crest Epic Crate and the Gold Crest Rare Crate. Both of these boxes are fairly cheap. They are 35 doubloons each and 10 doubloons each respectively. These can be opened 3 times per day and 5 times per day. So these have a 5% chance at 75 gear. A 5% chance, cheap but daily. And I recommend doing these every single day because you might get a solid 2-broker. So for instance, I got a 75 light headwear with enchanted ward and health. This is a nice 2-broker that is going to last me a decent while until I get better raid gear. Same with the earring. I got an earring with empowering toast, refreshing toast, and healing heart, which again is gonna be usable for a little while until I get better gear. So this is a very useful daily to effectively bank on and just see if you get anything good out of it. Now again, it's a 5% chance. There's a high chance you probably won't get anything good. You'll get some orichalcum ore or something like that. Scrolling down to the consumables exchange, there's 2 things you can get from here daily that I would also recommend picking up. That is the dark matter. You can get 50 dark matter a day and 5 gypsum orbs a day from the doubloon exchange. While we're here, we'll also quickly talk about the faction vendor. So the faction vendor is also going to provide you some important dailies for your in-game progression. So going into the vendor here, we're going to go down to the bottom to the magus tier, or the last tier depending on your faction, and there's going to be something called a chromatic seal. You want to try and buy these every single day. They're on a 1-day cooldown. Now these are going to be important for upgrading artifacts, named gear, and just in general. I believe that I don't think they're used for crafting, but they are again used for the named artifact upgrades and named item upgrades, and are very important to use. A quick note I also want to add in here, we'll talk about that in a sec here after talking about the pre-raid gear. So there's also another way you can get pre-raid gear, and that is through the trade post or elite chest run. So we'll cover the trade post first. So if you, for example, didn't get the greatest of gear through the doubloon exchange from those purple boxes, you can head to the trading post and you can search up some cheap gear and use it temporarily until you get a replacement. So there are a few perks you want to look out for pre-raid gear, for pre-raid PvP gear. The first one I always jump for and always recommend being your priority in gear is Elemental Aversion. In my opinion, this is one of the best dex defensive perks you can have. What Elemental Aversion does is it effectively gives us an extra resistance to elemental attacks, and there are a lot of elemental builds in the game right now that this is going to be beneficial for. So in fact, this is a really good piece right here, and I might even pick this up myself. So this piece right here, Elemental Aversion, receive 4.5% less damage from ranged elemental attacks. Now this works for fire staff, split damage on musket and bow, and any other sort of elemental range weapon like IG or VG. It is again a fantastic perk. Now another perk that you could also look out for, however, is Enchanted Ward as a primary pre-raid BiS gear perk, or pre-raid BiS. So we click apply here, and again, Enchanted Ward gear. It's a little bit more pricey, it appears. But for example, 2k for an Enchanted Ward refreshing empowering shooter stance, that could be a solid pre-raid piece of gear. Now keep in mind, you need to look out for your weight class here, so you would go into the left here, you would go light, and then you would go chest, for example. But again, constantly checking the trade post for cheap gear is something I would highly recommend doing until you get pre-raid BiS. Your best bet, again, is the doubloon vendor, but you can also check the trade post as well. I believe this is oh no, that's Russia. So you also get Outpost Rush boxes if you played Outpost Rush that can sometimes give you usable gear as well. Yes, so this is an example of a gold cursed gear piece I got. So I got a physical aversion, thrust conditioning, and health piece from one of my doubloon boxes, which is going to be hold me off for a little bit until I get raid BiS gear. So you're probably wondering one thing: why have I not mentioned harnessing yet? Most importantly, that is because harnessing is no longer relevant. I'm going to mention 2 reasons why. The first reason is the bugged ring, the elemental band. The elemental band is empower. The damage you get from it is empower. So every stack you get from an elemental damage type, so I'm putting up the elemental band on the screen here, is going to give you a 4% empower. And currently this is bugged where it is working with damage over time and attunement, even though it says it doesn't. So you easily get 12% empower guaranteed on your musket alone if you have attunement, rune glass, and 50% damage split. So what does that mean? That means we can drop harnessing on our armor and put more defensive perks on. The reason why we ran harnessing pre-New World Aeternum is because it's always uptime and power. It was always loved because, again, it was never had requirements to be up. It was a constant damage increase that you didn't have to proc. But with the recent changes in the meta and needing more defensive perks, we are making some big changes to gear. And one of those being replacing harnessing with conditionings to be more tanky, especially in the current slash and hatchet meta. I'm going to be swapping harnessing out for slash conditioning in my best in slot sets. So I quickly wanted to cover that there. But what happens when the elemental band gets fixed and is no longer bugged? Will it still be usable? Will it still be for dex? And most importantly, would that mean harnessing would come back? The answer is no. we're not going to be bringing harnessing back, but also once the elemental ban gets fixed, we're also no longer going to be using that, as it will no longer be useful for decks, as we wouldn't have the requirements to proc a lot of Empower off it no longer. So what would we put on? Now, there's a artifact that I mentioned earlier that we would be slotting back over the elemental band when we get it. That is the Endless Thirst Earring. This Endless Thirst Earring has a perk on it, I think I even have it on my current earring, called Empowering Toast. Empowering Toast gains 10% Empower for 8 seconds on a 10-second cooldown when we use it, when we use a potion. So what you can do, and what I'm going to be doing, is having a simple mana potion in my hotbar to proc this Empowering Toast. And it's going to be very, very easy to proc, and we also have Refreshing Toast as well. Now, I quickly want to mention that the Empowering Toast is going to empower all of your damage, including your thrust and your dots, which is important. Because there's something very specific that the harnessings didn't actually do. While they did count towards our Empower cap, and I quickly want to mention there is a Empower cap in New World, which is 50%, and I have a full guide on how Empower caps work that I will put in the description so you can understand the math behind that a little bit more. Is that harnessing only counted towards the element of Empower. It didn't count towards increasing our thrust damage, it didn't increase our dot damage, and didn't increase our bleeds, our burns, or anything like that. And it's the simple reason why I am phasing harnessing out of my gear. To me, harnessing is no longer beneficial, as it is a waste of Empower. There's Empower that is only contributing to a small net gain compared to Empowering Toast, for example, or even Empower Tree talent that is going to effectively give us Empower to everything, including our dots, including our thrust damage, which is why I recommend avoiding harnessing and going for more tanky perks that are going to net you survivability over maybe at most a 5% damage gain compared to a 10% damage gain. So, what are the other options to get Empower? So, let's look at this from a broader perspective. How do we want to hit 50% Empower cap now in the new meta? This is going to get a little bit nerdy, and this is going to also where we start branching into the best in slot gear. So, first off, we have Empowering Toast. Let's put that down as an example of 10%. So, we have 10% to start off with. Now let's add in our Rune Glasses. Rune Glasses are end game gems that we will mention in a little bit here, that will give us 2% each. This is an elemental Empower too, so this will not empower our gems, but this also doesn't take up a perk slot, so we might as well use it. So let's add in another 10% Empower. So now we are at 20% Empower. Let's add in a tier 5 Honing Stone. We are now at 27% Empower. Let's now go into our Musket Tree, and let's add a Empowering Headshot. On Headshot, gain Empower, increasing damage dealt by 10% for 5 seconds. So now we are at 37% Empower. Now let's go on the right side of the tree and Empowering Weakness, which is hitting an active target with a debuff, increases your damage by 5 seconds for 5%, or 5% for 5 seconds. Now we are at 42% Empower. And last but not least, we have Initial Engagement, which is the first tier on Power Shot, which increases our base damage by 10% for 5 seconds, which is an Empower as well, for 5 seconds. So now we're at 52% Empower without needing harnessing. And the best part about most of these Empowers, other than the Rune Glass Empowers, is that they're contributing to all of our dots as well, which is the best part about this Empower, and is again why I'm phasing out harnessing entirely. Empower that is more general than specific elemental is going to be more beneficial in the long run, increasing our overall damage than just our elemental damage, which in my eyes is very important when we discuss the next best in slot perks for both Musket and Rapier, as well as even Bow. I will briefly mention it here, which come from the new raid. So now that we have all of the Empowers talked about, what is the optimal armor perks and musket for best in slot that is earned predominantly through the new raid and the old worm raid? So jumping into it, we'll start off with the musket, which I can actually show you guys in game as I completed my first raid run yesterday, is the Hoplite Musket. This is a chart dropping from the last boss in the new Hive of Gorgons raid. This has an exclusive new perk on it. Well, it's not exclusive, you can buy a craft mod for it, called Disdained Infliction. Disdained Infliction increases the potency of outgoing damage over time effects by 15%. Hitting a target inflicted by a dot will also increase the duration on them by 5%. That is not that much of an effect, but again, the potency by 15% is massive. And to add to that, it also has a PvE only bonus that deals 5% increased base damage. So this also has a built-in PvE enchanted as well as an extra measure, which makes the perk even more so better for PvE especially. But again, that 15% potency for Disdained Infliction is massive when we stack it with things like Abyssal Attunement and Keenly Jagged, increasing those dots by a further amount. So, Abyssal Attunement is a common perk that we've always put on muskets for about a couple of years now, ever since the Brimstone launch, when I think they got added, or they might have gotten added in the Arena update. This is a best in slot perk, and everyone pretty much uses it on a bow or musket. It's a 14% weapon damage increase to an element on a 1.5 second cooldown, so pretty much every musket shot, as the reload is fairly slow, you will be getting an extra damage increase, which is really nice. Disdained Infliction works on that. And to that, we have Keenly Jagged. Keenly Jagged also gets the buff by Disdained Infliction. And then at the top here, we have our Augmented Abyssal Runeglass. I quickly want to mention it here. The reason why I'm building into Void, as you've probably noticed, is because I want to double purpose my gear for the Life Taker setup. The Life Taker build is probably going to come out in the following days, but I want to focus on the OG Musket Rapier set before we jump into the more niche musket setups. Now, the Musket Life Taker is actually becoming more of a prominent build, but I wanted to start off with the more basic Musket Rapier set that more of you will be familiar with, especially if you're new to the game from leveling with the archetype. So, we're starting, again, going off with the gem here. What an Augmented Abyssal Gem does is it converts 50% of our damage dealt to Void. And at that, it also gives us a 2-second dot of 8% Void damage, which is, as you might have guessed, scales with Disdained Infliction, which makes it very strong, as not only is Disdained Infliction is buffing effectively 4 things on our musket. Disdained Infliction is buffing the Augmented Abyssal dot, the Abyssal Attunement dot, and the Keenly Jagged dot, and it's also buffing Powder Burn in our musket tree itself, which is also a massive gain. So we are getting a massive damage increase with this Disdained Infliction perk, which is actually really, really nice. On top of that, we have Finisher's Harmony. So Finisher's Harmony means we get 15% more damage to bleeding targets. So if we get Keenly Jagged on a target, now we're dealing 25%, 15%. We're basically doubling down on our Keenly Jagged damage. Or it's not doubling down, it's around about a quarter more, because it's theoretically, if the bleed is 400 damage, it becomes 460, all the math added up. But besides the point, this is, in my opinion, the new best in slot musket, which is only obtained either by completing the raid or by crafting it with a Gorgonite Inductor, which again also drops once per week from the raid. Which is another thing I'll quickly want to mention here, is it is very important to complete the raid once a week. Now, this does suck for my solo friends, as this does put you at a significant disadvantage, as theoretically, you will never be able to get this musket, even through crafted, as the Gorgonite Inductor is a bind-on pickup craft, which does suck, and I hope AGS does add more ways to get 725 gear, but as it stands, the only way to get the best in slot musket is via the raid. Now, people in turn, I will mention, will start selling carries for gold in the near future at a very reduced price. As things track and more people start doing buses, you will be able to get the raid rewards by effectively paying gold to a raid runner. That'll become more prevalent than ever before, and is New World's real first proper raid. And I'm not going to lie, I had a lot of fun doing the raid. I highly recommend getting a group of friends and giving it a shot. It is actually not that difficult. The raid just really requires comms, if I'm going to be honest. Comms are the most important part of the raid, and understanding each person's role. I enjoyed the raid, and I highly recommend giving it a shot, as I said. So, we've covered the best in slot musket, we've covered the finisher, but we haven't covered what perk I added to the finisher. There's going to be a few options I recommend here. So, we'll quickly talk about how to upgrade artifacts, but most importantly, what perk should you add? So I added Disdained Infliction personally, but you can also add Keenly Empowered as another fantastic option to the finisher. So how do you upgrade artifacts? First off, you need to go to a gypsum kiln and make sure it's in your bag. So there's a very weird bug that the game has had for a very long time now, where you cannot upgrade Heartrunes or artifacts or named items if they're in a gear set or in your equip slot. So you need to make sure the artifact is number 1 in your bag before you go to the gypsum kiln. Now, gypsum kilns are located in Ebonscale, Brimstone Sands, Eden Grove, and I think Reekwater as well. They're not in Cutlass Keys for some reason, which is technically a new in-game zone. So, going into Brimstone Sands here, you can see this icon right here, the Gypsum Kiln. Whether that be a named item from the Gorgon Raid, the Elite Sandworm, or from the Doubloon Exchange, and as well as your artifacts, which would be down at the bottom here. I don't know why they're at the bottom, but they are. Somewhere down here, if I find them. Yep. So, you'll be able to upgrade your artifacts to 725 down here at the bottom as well, using a Gold Crest Coconut or an Inductor here. The Gold Crest Coconut, I quickly want to mention, this comes once per week from the Free-For-All Island in Cutlass Keys. You have to loot a major stockpile, one of the big chests, and you'll have a chance at it, and again, you get one of these per week. So again, you can use a Gold Crest Coconut or the Inductor, which is also once per week from the raid. I wouldn't recommend using these for upgrades. I would save these for your crafted your crafted armor. So you'll pick a Gold Crest Coconut, you would lock in your perks, you would get your Matrix, your Dark Matter, your Gypsum Orbs, and your Chromatic Seal, and then you would be able to effectively craft your 725 artifacts, which is pretty nice and is one of the easiest 725 items you can actually get, being the artifacts. Same with the named items, you can upgrade those in the same similar way at the Gypsum Kiln. One of the other quick things I want to mention is effectively the best in slot gear. So on my website, if I haven't mentioned it already, I have the full best in slot gear for the current meta. Currently it is listed with the Elemental Band, and as soon as the Elemental Band does fall out of meta and become not best in slot anymore, I will be taking that off and swapping back the Endless Thirst for the other Empower source. But while the Elemental Band is currently bugged, I highly recommend using it. So, what is the best in slot armor for muskets? So, we've covered both the rapier and the musket. Now let's cover the armor and the jewelry. So, we've outlined the Attuned leather pants and the Endless Thirst or the Elemental Band as the other best in slot artifacts. What do we use for our boots, gloves, chest, and head? So, for the chest, we are going to be using a named item called the Silken Cocoon from the new Sandworm raid. This has an illegal perk combo on it, which is going to be very strong in conjunction with the Attuned leather pants. As you can see, it has Keen and Shirking energy on it. This is a very good item, and is again one of those items that is now locked behind a raid, which you do need a 20-man group for, and is apparently harder than the Hive of Gorgons raid. It is nice that there is a proper in-game now, I won't lie, but it also does suck if you're a solo player, as getting best in slot musket gear is now unobtainable for you in the current state of game. So I really, again, hope that AGS adds new ways to get the best in slot gear, or at least get 725 gear, but as it stands, the only current way to get this stuff is from these big group-based raids that require good communication. So, to start off with, again, you have the Silken Cocoon chest that has Shirking Energy and Keen. We're going to be adding a Conditioning or Elemental Aversion to this, your preference. I would probably go Elemental Aversion, as that's what I usually run. And then for the gloves, we're going to be using Crafted with the Gorgonite Inductor down here. We're going to be using, I believe I have Hasted Vigor and Flame Conditioning and Flame Conditioning / Conditioning and Hasted Vigor. Hasted Vigor is a new perk that drops from the raid that will effectively allow you to get haste upon taking damage from a damage over time effect. So in theory, you should have almost a permanent 10% haste from this perk, provided you get hit by any damage over time effect in PvP. This is why I highly recommend running one piece of Hasted Vigor. The only problem with Hasted Vigor, and why I only recommend running one of it, is because it does take the slot of Enchanted Ward and Elemental Aversion, which are two very prominent defensive perks in the current PvP meta. So, with that said, again, I'm going to be adding Hasted Vigor to my crafted gloves with the Gorgonite Inductor, with Slash and Flame Conditioning to make me ultra tanky. You can have 2 conditionings, I forgot to mention that. You can have a conditioning from both separate perk pools. So for example, I can't have Flame Conditioning and Abyssal Harnessing. No, Abyssal Conditioning, that's a thing. I think that's a thing. Obviously you wouldn't run that anyways. But you can't have, for example, you can't have Thrust Conditioning and Slash Conditioning, I don't think. But you can have an Elemental Conditioning and a Physical Conditioning, so you can have Slash and Flame, which is what I'm personally going to be running on my gloves to be very tanky against the two of the builds that I find the most oppressive in PvP, being Hatchet and SNS, and the Flamethrower, or the Fire Staff, sorry. And then for the helmets, or the headwear, that is also going to be crafted with a Gorgonite Inductor, and that is going to be a similar thing to the gloves, except no Hasted Vigor. I'm going to be running Elemental Aversion, Slash Conditioning, and Flame Conditioning to be ultra tanky once again. Jumping onto the boots here, the boots are a brand new named item that also come from the Sandworm trial, that also have an illegal perk combo, Enchanted Ward and Elemental Aversion. Very, very nice setup there for defensive perks, and I'm going to be adding Crippling Powder Burn to this piece to get that named perk there, or to get that perk there for my musket, which gives me slow when I hit my Powder Burn. This perk has been nerfed a little bit since before New World Aeternum, but it is still a must-have pickup for the musket build. Again, that slow is going to help you a lot on the Powder Burn. So last but not least, I believe we have the jewellery. So we've covered the chest with the Silken Cocoon, and we've covered the June feet wraps, and we've covered the crafted gloves and the crafted head. I forgot to mention the perk that I added to my Attuned leather pants. So I added Shirking Energy, and you're probably wondering, hey, you've already got Shirking Energy on your chest. They stack. So I'm going to have effectively almost OG Shirking Energy. I don't think quite. I think OG Shirking Energy was like 45 stamina dodge. But effectively, I'm going to be getting 32 stamina upon successful light dodge attack. Or light attack dodge, which is insane, by the way. So effectively, again, I'm going to be having OG Shirking Energy, stacking this with that named chest piece with that illegal perk combo, which is going to be absolutely insane, and I can't wait to get that piece from the Sandworm raid. Last but not least, we have our jewellery. So for amulets, we're going to be running a named amulet also from the Sharnetian trial. Now, I highly recommend trying to get this to run with Int, so when you complete the raid, or about to complete the raid, I recommend speccing into Intelligence and taking off all your other pieces of jewellery to loot bias an Int, or an Intelligence scaling Sharnetian amulets. An Intelligence scaling Sharnetian amulets will give you health and stam recovery, and you can add at the Gypsum Kiln to upgrade it to 725 either Flame Protection or Thrust Protection. Now, I'm going to probably be going with Thrust Protection, as most of my build currently is catered towards Flame Conditioning and Slash Conditioning, and I do want some Thrust Conditioning in there for ranged attacks. So that's what I'm going to be going with on my amulet. On my ring, as we've discussed, I'm going to be doing the Elemental Band until it is fixed. Once the Elemental Band is fixed, I will be trying to get the Hoplite Ring, which also comes from the Hive of Gorgons raid. The Hoplite Ring has, I believe, it was Bloodletting and Hardy, and to that you can add your damage type, so I will be adding Void Damage to my ring. Now, Void Damage, I've also forgot to mention, is an Empower, so the damage perk on ring is Empower. So we're going to be getting the Void Damage, and we're going to be getting the Hardy and Bloodletting. The Bloodletting will increase the duration of our dots over time, and is why I think the Hoplite Ring is really strong. But again, Elemental Band will be the current temporary artifact ring I use until then. So, for the earring, again, once the Elemental Band ring is fixed, you'll be swapping that out for the Endless Thirst artifact earring, which increases our potion, consumable strength, which is very strong and I absolutely love. But until then, you could kind of use any 725 earring, so I'm probably going to be using my Empowering Toast, Refreshing Toast, Healing Heart for quite a while until the Elemental Band gets fixed. I mean, the ideal perks you'll be looking for on earring would be Empowering Toast, Refreshing Toast, and Nimble is what I think I have on my website. Again, if you want the best in slot builds fully neatly laid out, you can indeed check it out on my website. as a quick reference without having to come back to this almost hour-long video discussing shit. So again, we've discussed pretty much all of the gear now. We've discussed the Heartrunes. I think the last thing that I haven't discussed is the gems I use. So in armor, I'm going to be using all abyssal / ward. Again, I'm building with void. If you're building with a different element, then you would go like nature / ward or such so and so. So I'm going to be going full abyssal / ward, which gives me slash resistance and increases my void damage. So my dot, my rune glass, and my gem, and my musket, and my ring all add up together to give me a nice damage increase. That is also in power, by the way. So that is another chunk of empower I think I forgot to add at the start there. So that is effectively, I think, most parts there. Maybe I forgot to talk about the jewellery gems. So in jewellery, I'm going to be running, this is from the raid, by the way, don't run this. I'm probably going to be running either emeralds or rubies in jewellery for fire protection or thrust protection, depending on what I want. And that, I think, is pretty much everything. I think I might have forgot to show my in-game stat splits, so I'll quickly show those. So, for most PvP situations, I run 350 dexterity, 200 int, and the rest in constitution. This is doable with your food buff, which I also forgot to mention, is whenever I play PvP, I usually use the fruit salad consumable, as it is the cheapest. This gives just a plus 44 to intelligence. And I think that is almost everything. Yeah. And I did mention the Gold Coast Coconut, the Dailies, the Sandworm Trial, and the Gorgon Raid for the best in slot gear. I think we have pretty much discussed everything. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video where we talk about the Musket Life Taker. This video was a bit longer than usual, and I plan to make Musket Life Taker and the bow build videos a little bit shorter, as this video covers a lot of the premise of those builds. So this is sort of an introduction to musket at the end game, which I recommend sticking all the way through if you have. I appreciate that. And again, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.